Welcome back, everyone. Tom Gerhardt, North Dakota United, along with North Dakota United President Nick Archuleta. And we're into double digits in terms of weeks at the legislature, and you were one busy man this week.
Well, I was fairly busy, but so was the legislature, and that's good. I know they're trying to get their work done as quickly as possible, and maybe even leave here by the third week of April, so they have time to come back for redistricting and whatever else they might need to do.
You wanted to start off talking about a couple of PERS bills.
Yeah, actually a trio of PERS bills. It was PERS Palooza at the Capitol this week. I testified on three different bills. The first one was House Bill 1209, and this bill, in its first iteration, was a terrific bill. It was put in by Representative Matt Ruby from Minot, and it called for an infusion of cash into PERS, as well as some really interesting ideas about how to get that fund fully funded within 20 years. I mean, those ideas really deserve some serious consideration and discussion. Unfortunately, once the rescue package came out of Washington, D.C. last week, in there was a provision that said you can't use any ESSER money or any of the CARES money to pay down debts of retirement systems. So that part of that bill was out. They decided to turn that bill into a study, and that would have been fine if all they wanted to do was study PERS. That's great, I suppose, but it also called for the conclusion of that study to be end the defined benefits plan. Well, that's a non-starter with us. The defined benefits plan is and agency heads will tell you this too, it is an incredibly good recruitment and retention tool that they can use. And so we testified against it. PERS testified against it. I don't know what its fate will be, but that bill right now has so many problems, not just in terms of killing the defined benefit plan, but there's also some legal issues that's going to run into. So I'm hoping that they took our testimony seriously and that they just decided to give it a do not pass.
All right, let's move on to the second PERS-related bill.
Sure. That's House Bill 1245, and this bill was terrible. I mean, this was terrible from the start. Basically, what happens here is that rather than trust the PERS board to send out RFPs and solicit plans for medical coverage, for hospitalization coverage, for prescription drug coverage, what would happen then is they could still do that, but they could not give the final authority to purchase those things or to award those contracts. That would have to go to a 42-member budget section, and that's made up of representatives and senators, Democrats and Republicans alike. But it would usurp that power from PERS. There are some legal issues with this as well, based on the court case from after last session, Legislature v. Burgum. It's one thing, once the legislature makes a law, it's an executive function to enforce the law. And so what they're trying to do is reclaim that from the executive branch. This is ugly. I don't think this is going to go anywhere, but we thought we better get out there and testify against it nonetheless.
All right, House Bill 1246, the final of the trio.
Yeah, and this is a bill we've been looking for, at least in its original form. This was a bill we've been looking for since, 2011.
Yeah.
In 2011, following the economic meltdown of 2008, 2009, that really hurt pension plans in North Dakota and across the country and around the world where they have them. There was a fix that was put in for the teacher fund for retirement. They went to a two-tiered system. They delayed when you can retire and get full benefits. The contribution rate went up, and they put that in one session. And as a result, though it's not fully funded yet, TFFR is on the trajectory to become fully funded. They did the first 3 years for PERS, but they didn't do the final year. And had they done the final year of funding in 2011, PERS would be fully funded in, get this, 2041. So 20 years from now, it would be fully funded. Instead, they didn't do it. They kicked the can down the road. They didn't do it in 2013. They didn't do it in 2015. They didn't do it in 17. They didn't do it in 19. And now we have this unfunded liability that is frankly very bad for the state and the political subdivisions who belong to it. So right now, 1246, in its original form, we testified for that in the first half of the legislature because it was the fix that we were looking for since 2011, and so there's a 1% increase on the part of the employer and 1% increase on the part of the employee, and we were very happy with that. Instead, it left with an amendment that changed that full percentage to a 0.5% on the part of the employer and the employee. It's a step in the right direction, so we testified in favor of it, but it is not as far as it could go. So that was PERS this week.
All right. Let's talk about a voucher bill that we've been keeping a very close eye on, House Bill 1282.
Yeah, House Bill 1282 was the third of the 3 voucher bills that we had our eye on. We beat the first 2 in the first half, and this one, for some reason, made it through. And frankly, I thought this would be the easiest one to beat. Now, what do I know? So what happens then is this thing will be heard on the floor. We testified against it in committee, and it came out of the committee with a do not pass recommendation, but it'll be heard on the floor. And just because it comes out do not pass, we do not take that for granted. So we're going to be asking our members, of course, to contact their legislators and make sure that this we can beat this thing. It's in the Senate.
Senate Bill 2215, another bill we'd like to see amended or defeated, would place a limit on bargaining.
Yes, it would. And this was heard in front of the House Education Committee this week. And I want to thank Joe and Jen from Fargo for testifying virtually on this as well. I testified against it. This is, frankly, it's a bill that doesn't solve a problem. So we testified against it. The testimony was well received. There was one legislator, incidentally, in my testimony, I said something to the effect that those teachers that went on strike in Minot back in 1969, and those actions resulted in the bargaining bill that we have today. I said, when I think of those, Mr. Chairman, I think of heroes. And one of the Republican members on the committee called me over after my testimony and said, "I told my brother you think he's a hero." It turns out he was one of the teachers who was fired from Minot Public Schools. He said that, yes, he was heroic, although at the time in 1969, he was a new teacher. Their dad didn't think he was so heroic. But now time has proven that they have been heroic. We need to make sure that 2215 is defeated. We'll see what happens. Frankly, it's got some momentum. It's got some big names behind it. But we're in there slugging away.
And I wanted to add Melissa from Grand Forks.
And Melissa from Grand Forks.
Just so we don't forget
her
exactly.
And her she was terrific.
Much
too.
Appreciated.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the mask bill, House Bill 1323, moving along, and where do things stand there?
The mask bill is it's probably going to be heard next week. Let me just tell you about the mask bill. What it would do is it would prohibit political subdivisions from asking for a mask mandate during a time of, pandemic, as unlikely as that might be. I happen to have the pleasure of meeting with Fargo Public Schools leadership and West Fargo Public Schools leadership and the legislators that represent those 2 communities during the crossover, and those leaders said that if this bill were to pass, they could not have face-to-face instruction in their schools. I don't know how to put it more bluntly than that, but if you want schools, you have to defeat 1323. And frankly, I can't believe this bill is even alive, because it doesn't deserve to be.
Moving along, a big one, Senate Bill 2003 impacts all of our higher ed institutions.
It does. 2003 is the funding bill. They've had numerous hearings, all day long hearings, day after day hearings on this. It's a big bill. And so they're working on it now in the Appropriations Committee, and so we should be hearing something. I don't know when exactly, but I would think by the end of next week we should have something more to report.
Moving along again, Senate Bill 2030.
Yeah, I testified on this bill too. This is another higher ed bill, and it affects challenge grants. We love challenge grants. I mean, what challenge grants do is they allow the universities to leverage their money, because if their foundations were to raise $2, the state of North Dakota would put in $1. And then they use that money for things like research, for things like scholarships, and very important things to enhance education throughout the system. Unfortunately, in the Senate, there were 2 amendments that were put on this that made the bills untenable. The first one was Senator Murdahl from District 10, I believe, put in an amendment that says something that if a university has any sort of relationship with an organization like Planned Parenthood that provides abortion, whether it's about abortion or not, it could be sex ed training or whatever it might be, then they don't qualify for the challenge grants. Here's the thing, though. I mean, the UND School of Medicine. They do all kinds of things medical that might run afoul of this, and so they wouldn't qualify. In fact, the university system up on this particular point said that most of their universities would not qualify for this, and that would be unfortunate because this challenge grant program is terrific. The second amendment that was put in allowed our two private universities in North Dakota, the University of Jamestown and the University of Mary, fine institutions of higher education. I will say that because it's true. They brought them into the system too. We, of course, in our legislative agenda, in the university system as well, believe that monies that are raised for public purposes should stay with public entities and not go to private institutions of higher ed or private schools. So if those two amendments come out, they go forward. I will say this, though, that the university system testified that if these amendments don't go out, they would rather have the bill killed than actually passed. So that's how egregious these two amendments are seen.
Let's talk about another big topic, K12 funding.
1388. This is the bill that carries the DPI's budget. It's in Senate approps now, and they're working on that. But we heard or offered some testimony in the Senate Ed Committee. Unfortunately, 1388 came across from the House with no increases in the per pupil formula. And that's unfortunate. Right now, the formula calls for $10,036 per pupil, and that's where the House decided to leave it. They're counting on all of this ESSER money being coming from the federal government, and that's fair enough, I suppose, except that ESSER money can't be used for salaries. It can be used for bonuses, like retention bonuses or recruitment bonuses, but it can't be used for salary. Senator Shively asked for an amendment to increase the per pupil funding in 1388 by 1% the first year of the biennium, 1% the second year. I testified that should be 2% the first year, 2% the second year, and then I wanted 70% of that money dedicated to salaries for school personnel. We'll see what they do with that. I know that amendment will be offered in committee, but they're working it up right now.
All right, back to higher ed, and House Bill 1503 dealing with free speech is up. You'll testify on that bill this Monday, I believe. Yep,
it's up on Monday, and frankly, this is a bill that some of the worst aspects of it have been stripped out by amendment, the ones that would punish individuals, but it still, frankly, is a detriment to free speech. University professors should have the latitude and the academic freedom to talk about what they talk about in their classes. This bill narrowly focuses what they can talk about to the subject matter at hand. Well, anybody that teaches knows that one thing leads to another thing, and that's good because we have a better understanding then of how our world interlocks and interacts with things that might not seem to fit right in that alley. We're going to testify against this bill, of course, and we hope that this is defeated because it was up last session, maybe even the session before, and it was defeated both times.
House Bill 1298, another bill you testified on this past week. A lot of emotion surrounding this bill, but I know you wanted to share a word with how that went this week.
Yeah, 1298, House Bill 1298 is the transgender bill is how it's being referred to, but it would prohibit trans girls from competing in sports in North Dakota. Well, this is another bill that's not necessary. This is an ideological bill that, frankly, has no place in our statutes. The High School Activities Association in North Dakota already has a policy dealing with transgender athletes. We don't need this. There's never been a case where this has been an issue in North Dakota. It is not a coincidence that this is a bill that's being heard in 20-plus state houses across the country, and that brings it to 71 over the last 71 different bills in the last 2 years on this issue. This is not a good bill. It's frankly divisive, and it hurts some young people who are really having an issue finding themselves. What is their place in their schools? What is their place in their society? Frankly, this bill doesn't do anything but exacerbate the problems for them.
Well, let's land on another big topic, and that's public employee potential pay increases. Mm-hmm. I know we've been talking a lot about March 16th being a key date. Well, March 16th came and went this week.
Yes, it did.
And What have you heard from the Capitol? Supposedly some news will be announced this week.
Yeah, there will be some news on this. I think it's coming out Monday about what the compromise is on public employee salaries. We've heard that it's going to be 1.5 the first year and then 2% the second year. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. So we'll wait till Monday or Tuesday, whenever they decide to release this information. But your point about March 16th, when the new revenue forecast came out, the new revenue forecast came out and it was quite good. I mean, it looks like revenues are going to exceed what expectations were. So we think it's it's a little bit goofy to say just wait till those projections come out, and when they do come out, they say, well, no, they're not good enough. Well, they are good enough, and we should be investing in the people of North Dakota as we struggle to get back on our feet following this pandemic.
All right. Well, that wraps up another week for North Dakota United President Nick Archuleta. I'm Tom Gerhart. We invite you, as always, to visit our website, ndunited.org, and there you can find a list of key bills and other information about this legislative session. Until next week, have a great weekend.